30 years ago this week, Margaret Thatcher came to power, promising to sow hope and harmony. Her years in Downing Street saw some of the worst violence of the Troubles, but also produced the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was an important step in the process which 11 years later brought the Good Friday Agreement. So, Maggie Thatcher, monster or misunderstood moderate? Discuss. Brian Feeney, she was hardline on Republicans, but in terms of the general nationalist population, was she a Cromwell-like figure?
I don't think she was a Cromwell-like figure for the whole nationalist population, but the real damage she did was the crackdown on republicanism, which spilt over onto the whole nationalist population. So the whole district suffered from the security policy that she introduced. I mean, she always really did believe that there was a security answer. And even the Anglo-Irish Agreement that you mentioned, she saw that as a way of improving security and actually reneged on the details of the agreement, like 3-judge courts, having the UDR always accompanied by the RUC. Didn't happen. But the effect of her policies on the whole nationalist community was disastrous.
And of course, as regards Republicans, there was a hunger strike, of course, there was the censorship issue, this beginning of Supergrass trials. They have a lot to resent.
They do, but of course the impact that she had by trying to be tough on Republicans and believing they could be beaten was the way to ensure that they were always going to resist. And I think one of the tragedies is that she was there for 12 years, and intelligence must have been telling her from 86 or 87 that Republicans wanted some kind of a deal, but she wouldn't consider it and wouldn't allow her ministers to speak to any kind of intermediary.
At the same time, Richard English, she did talk to Charlie Haughey. There was the whole classic teapot diplomacy. She spoke to Garret Fitzgerald and, of course, signed with him the Anglo-Irish Agreement, without which there would not have been a Good Friday Agreement.
I think that's true. While she'll be remembered by Republicans as the villain of the hunger strikes and by Unionists as the villain of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, most people now who would think that the Good Friday Agreement itself was a good thing would have to acknowledge that at least some of the foundations of that and the London-Dublin relationships on which it was built were founded during the period when she was in office with the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And there's also, of course, much more to her involvement with Northern Ireland than just the famous moments of the hunger strike and the Anglo-Irish Agreement. I mean, strangely, Thatcherite policies were not evenly implemented in Northern Ireland in terms of public spending. There were higher levels than there were in many parts of England. So it's a more complex legacy, even though she's primarily remembered by both communities as a villain.
Brian says, and it's generally agreed, that she did see a security element in the Anglo-Irish Agreement, but is she shortchanged? Was she more far-seeing in the whole diplomatic debate? I'm
not sure particularly far-seeing. I mean, I think that the anxiety she had when Sinn Féin, in the wake of the hunger strikes, were perceived to be catching up on the SDLP was, what on earth do we do about the IRA's political party? And she was desperate to try and stem that rise as she saw it, and desperate to get the Irish government involved in trying to counteract the IRA in terms of security. One of the ironies of her approach, in a way, was that someone who tried to undermine republicanism gave them an injection of momentum with the hunger strike and the anger that many people came after the hunger strikes to feel, but also someone who was instinctively a unionist and tried to support the union, was then remembered after the 85 as having injected new life actually into loyalism, because loyalist anger grew after 85. So her policies had an unwitting effect, I think.
Of course, Brian, the hunger strikes brought Bobby Sands to prominence and brought the Armalite and ballot box to life.
That's right. I mean, I can remember at the time Thatcher saying that the IRA had played their last card, and John Hume saying, well, as a matter of fact, you've dealt them a full hand, because that proved to them that they had a vote. They weren't sure that they had a vote before that. They were concerned about standing in European election in '79 in case they got absolutely wiped out. Sands proved that there was a Sinn Féin vote, regardless of what the candidate had done. And that really launched the Republicans on their electoral trajectory, and they wanted more and more into politics. But Richard's point about Thatcher not implementing Thatcherism here, while true, it wasn't because of her. She didn't know what the direct rule ministers were doing, and I can remember on one occasion they were terrified when the helicopter couldn't fly, and they were really worried that she was going to see the roads that had been built here, and they tried to find a way to distract her so that she wasn't on a decent road in case she suddenly thought, what, this is the wrong sort of, there should be more cuts here, we can't have this kind of thing. So she really didn't know a lot that was going on, but the real problem was she never wanted to have any kind of political initiative. And when Jim Pryor brought his assembly in, she did everything she could to try to destroy it, and had Ian Gow running up and down the aisles in the House of Commons to try to frustrate Jim Pryor,
to what extent, Richard, were her attitudes coloured marred by the assassination of Mary Neave, her great friend and colleague in Westminster, right at the beginning of her time in Downing Street.
I think that attack was obviously crucial in forming her particular hostility towards Republican terrorism, and also the fact that the IRA tried and nearly succeeded in killing her herself in 1984 in Brighton, which made a significant impact on her. I think it's true also that I would agree with Brian that she didn't pursue the kind of politics which later British Prime Ministers did in terms of trying to build consensus and reach out and so forth. It is also true that, interestingly, her response after Brighton was not to close the door on any kind of initiative with Dublin. I mean, it's actually quite a short time from October 1984 with the Brighton bomb to November 85 with the Anglo-Irish Agreement. So in that sense, I think one of the aspects of it is that she didn't really know exactly what to do about Northern Ireland. And I think that was true in all sorts, how to respond to the Unionists, how to respond to the IRA, how to deal with Dublin. So there was a kind of ad hoc quality to it. Out of that, some very unfortunate things came, and there was an injection of life into paramilitarism, I think, on both sides. But also, almost unwittingly, I think the Anglo-Irish Agreement did set in stone some kind of basis on which later policies which were more fruitful and peaceful could be built.
She had a great turn of phrase, Brian, love her or hate her, as British as Finchley, deny the IRA, the oxygen of publicity, out, out, out with regard to the New Ireland Forum recommendations.
That's right. All of which had disastrous effect because they were so simple. Those kind of sloganising remarks caused enormous antagonism, and certainly Gareth Fitzgerald on the out, out, out thing was very depressed because this was the culmination of years of work, and they had to start climbing up again. But the way they got round Thatcher was to use the American connection, and there's a huge involvement from the State Department to try to persuade Thatcher to think of another way of doing things, which did lead to the Anglo-Irish Agreement, although, as I say, she reneged on some of the important aspects of it.
And Richard Gordon Brown thought it necessary at one point recently to be seen photographed with Margaret Thatcher, who's in a state of decline now, of course, but she remains an iconic figure.
Unquestionably. I mean, she's one of the great figures of political history in modern British life, whether one loves or loathes her. The huge impact that she had on politics is still with us to some degree. I think quite often she's misremembered. I mean, actually, the phrase "as British as Finchley" is not what she actually said. So, I mean, there are ways in which she's somehow become iconic in ways that aren't always accurate. But I hope people will remember a more complex legacy than just the most famous bits of it, because there was more to it.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.